Hi, so this is Pamela from Animal Justice Emergency, and we've got a good one for you today. We're talking about propaganda, we're talking about lies, we're talking about COVID-19 and how suddenly slaughterhouses are being rebranded as food factories or meat packing plants. Why could that possibly be? States, there have been a load of so-called hotspots of slaughterhouses for outbreaks of COVID-19. So many slaughterhouse workers, although in the US these places are called meat packing plants. So many slaughterhouse workers have been tested, found positive, and some have died. 17,000 slaughterhouse workers at 220 facilities were infected with the virus, of which 66 died. In Cargill slaughterhouse in Canada, nearly 1,000 of 2,000 employees were infected and 2 died. This was mainly kicking off in March, and I remember at the time thinking, good grief, there's a slaughterhouse quite near where I am in the UK, and I do wonder what's going on there, but apparently they all had everything under control. Until a few days ago, when I started to find stuff on the media saying, oh no, there's been an outbreak of COVID-19 in Anglesey in Wales. One was called a food plant. An outbreak of coronavirus at a meat processing factory. The Two Sisters chicken factory. All the staff there are self-isolating after 61 workers tested positive, and that's about over 500 workers. So the update is that the plant, the slaughterhouse, closed for 14 days. This factory supplies the likes of KFC, Marks and Spencer's, Aldi, Asda, the Co-op and Morrison's. Apparently, about 1/3 of all the poultry products eaten each day in the UK come from this company. The council leader, the increasing number of cases and outbreak had caused a great deal of uncertainty and concern on the island. Two Sisters is one of the largest food producers in the UK. So now in that factory it has suspended production and closed the factory, which also supplies local authorities, hospitals, restaurants and small businesses. Meanwhile, not so very far away on the mainland in Wrexham, 38 staff have been tested positive at Rowan Foods, which is owned by something called Oscar Mayer Quality Foods, and this one supplies supermarkets like Aldi, Asda and Sainsbury's with ready meals. This massive slaughterhouse employs 1,500 people, and 38 were absent due to testing positive with COVID-19, but it said there was no clear evidence, no of course not, to suggest there was a spread of the virus within the site. Public Health Wales said an outbreak has not been declared at the site, and investigations were ongoing as to the possible cause of the cluster. And no firm conclusions can be reached at this early stage. An army unit is being set up in Wrexham to help test workers for COVID-19. Now suddenly the First Minister, although no firm conclusions can be reached at that stage, the First Minister of Wales, Mark Drakeford, said the virus at the Anglesey factory was down to its internal organisation. What's that mean? But it has been brought into the Wrexham factory, so he's drawn some very firm conclusions quickly, and that's completely opposite of what they said first of all. Propaganda, cover up, you decide. What is the reason why these factories, these slaughterhouses, don't really enforce social distancing and proper protective measures? In Wales, employers face a fine of up to £120 if they do not do, quote unquote, everything they can to make sure that workers can socially distance at work. Everything they can. You don't get more elastic than everything they can. 120, is it 120 per worker? Is it 120 per worker per day? Or is it a one-off £120? Do you know what I'm saying? It's like these are multi-million pound businesses. 120 quid, that is derisory. It's taking the mickey out of the slaughterhouse workers themselves. 120 quid a day. These people could die, They're forced into this work. They don't choose to do it. Nobody chooses to do that sort of work. It's derisory. The Food Standards Agency has weighed in with and said that it was, quote, very unlikely that you can catch coronavirus from food as it's a respiratory virus. Very unlikely doesn't mean to say it's impossible though, does it? It means we're just covering our backs. This is propaganda. This is lies. This is just trying to make it all very fuzzy. This is smoke and mirrors. Some of the biggest outbreaks of COVID-19 worldwide have been in quote-unquote meat processing factories, slaughterhouses. In Ireland, a special national outbreak team has been put in place to deal with the large numbers of clusters in meat plants, i.e. slaughterhouses. And then last week, thousands of people in Germany were told to quarantine after 650 workers tested positive for the virus at another slaughterhouse. Then we got another story following this one up. A meat processing site owned by Asda in West Yorkshire became the third food plant in 48 hours to confirm an outbreak after 150 workers were infected with the virus. And they've actually used the words fell ill. And I think that's really interesting. Did they fall ill? They were infected with the virus. The Cobra plant, which supplies bacon, i.e. fleshy stomach of a pig, a sentient being that was tortured to death for no reason, to Asda supermarkets and employs over 500 people. That's closed until next week. The Guardian is saying this raises concerns, you bet, about potential outbreaks similar to those seen in France and the US, where 25,000 meat and poultry workers, slaughterhouse workers, contracted COVID-19 with 91 deaths. Clarkson, who's national officer at Unite, has warned time and time again that COVID outbreaks at meat processing factories in the UK were likely. Well, I've been thinking about this since I saw the stuff about the American slaughterhouses being hotspots. And obviously, if you work in that industry in a managerial capacity, you will have access to the internet and you will be aware of all this stuff going on in the States. You'll be aware that you're under lockdown. You'll be aware that there is the possibility, the likelihood, a very strong likelihood, of the same thing happening in your slaughterhouse. So if you know about all this, that you know it could be causing, we know you don't care about the animals, but what about your workers? What about the general public? Yeah, we're in lockdown, okay? So you're aware of this. The union is saying, sort it out, and you're ignoring it. Because if they weren't ignoring it, they wouldn't be having all these cases. And then in Yorkshire, 3 workers died from coronavirus after what was called a small outbreak in Yorkshire in May. And you had 1,331 employees of 2,000 tested were positive. And the Guardian said last month, that's May, that almost half the COVID-19 hotspots in the US were linked to plants where animals and birds were slaughtered. So you've got France, you've got Spain, you've got Ireland, you've got Brazil, you've got Australia, where the same stuff is happening. Now this is an interesting one because this report I saw from a media group called France 24 had the very interesting title of How the Meat Industry Became a Global Health Liability. So they get a 9 out of 10 from me for that headline. They would have got a 10 out of 10 if they'd called it the animal death industry. how the animal death industry became a global health liability. But hey ho. So they were talking about in the US at the end of May, 17,000 slaughterhouse workers at 220 different facilities were infected with the virus and 66 died. And then they had a quote in this piece from a professor at the University of Texas, Austin, who's an expert on the global food system, Raj Patel. And he said workers are as expendable as the things, quote unquote, they are slaughtering. And I think he's encapsulated the problem, one of the problems here. Now, Patel, clearly not a vegan, despite that, has agreed that a drastic reduction in meat consumption, animal body parts consumption, is key to any sustainable future for the food system, workers, and the environment. Raj Patel has said in some cases this may mean boycotting meat. Yes, go to the top of the class. House workers in Iowa, one of the states which is most badly hit by COVID-19, the meat industry, workers have called for a nationwide meatless May. So a Latino civil rights organization called LULAC has asked Iowans to boycott corporate beef, pork, poultry and eggs in a show of solidarity with workers in slaughterhouses hit hard by the coronavirus. Meanwhile, in the EU, the farm to fork strategy has explicitly called for reducing the consumption of meat. Patel says, this is a moment to pivot. If ever you wanted a time where sustainable food systems were imaginable, where you had the labour force ready to engage in sustained transformation, now is the moment to do it. From non-vegan, we need to be very alert to the way that the language around all this is changing. And that now it's not about slaughterhouses, it's suddenly about meat packing plants and food factories. They're not food factories and they're not meat packing plants, they're slaughterhouses where living beings are tortured to death. And it reminds me of Carol J. Adams in The Sexual Politics of Meat when she talks about the absent referent. And she says that the word itself, meat, disappears, as it were, the animal, the being, whether it was a cow or a pig or a lamb or a chicken or a fish. By calling them meat, they disappear. And I think we've got exactly the same process going on where now slaughterhouses as a word are disappearing, and then now meat packing plants or food processing plants or food factories. And you could say, is this a coincidence? But it seems to me like it's a deliberate propaganda effort. Somebody who's a long-term SAVE activist in my area has commented about this and said that, suddenly the slaughterhouses are calling themselves meat packing plants. And this person has been involved in the SAVEs for years. So it's a sudden thing. Why? Because they're trying to downplay the connection between the death and the murder of animals, of sentient beings, and the possible transmission to the workers of the virus. What can we do about it? We read in any entity, whether it's the BBC, the Guardian, whoever else we read, a local paper, say, why are you calling them meat packing plants now? They're slaughterhouses. Letter to the editor, why not? If you can be bothered, in the comments section, why not? We're being lied to. There's propaganda. This is part of the propaganda arm of the animal death industry. People balk at the term of the animal death industry, perhaps, but that's what it is. They want to call it farming, in the same way that they want to call slaughterhouses meat packing plants. That's because the dominant culture is ruled by human supremacists who don't want to recognise the reality of what they're doing, torturing innocent beings to death for no reason. As vegans, part of our job is to help them become aware of the reality, because then, with good luck and a following wind, together we can end the war on animals. Thank you for listening. If you want to hear more of this sort of stuff, please feel free to like and subscribe, and I'd love to hear your comments.